Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of the Digging Deeper podcast, where we dig a little bit deeper into that week's sermon, so that way we might just dig it a little bit deeper into our hearts. We are so glad that y'all joined us here today. Let's introduce ourselves. My name is Chris Brown, and I'm the associate pastor here.
My name is Jacob Belding. I'm the connections minister here at First Baptist Azle.
Mm-hmm.
And my name is Michael, and I'm the reluctant one here today to help out.
Yes. Judah is out of town on a business trip. I assume it's a business trip. Business, right?
Business.
Yeah, right. So when Judah's out, we drag Michael in here, and he reluctantly agrees every now and then. So we are on a strict time limit, though. I told Michael we will be done by a certain time. And so I've got a timer up right here.
You never set a time, though.
We'll figure it out. We'll be done by a certain time.
What is time?
Yeah, what is time?
What is time? Time is relative, isn't it?
It's a social construct.
Yeah, that's right. We must break free.
Yeah, we must break free of the social construct. You got the sexual revolution, the gender revolution, now the time revolution.
That sounds cool.
Yeah. Anyways.
Too bad it was ordained at the beginning, you know.
That's true. Yeah, well, it depends on how you view, what's the word there?
Day.
For day. I don't remember what the Hebrew word is.
I haven't had Hebrew. I don't know.
Is it a literal day, or is it an era, a period of time? I don't know. We'll see. It has nothing to do with anything. We are here to talk about this week's sermon. And I'm going to throw Jacob for a curveball. I think he already sees what the curveball is coming, because he sees I don't have any notes. I was out of town this past week. I was with my wife at a conference. And so I haven't heard the sermon. I could have gone back and listened to it, but I decided not to.
Chose not to.
Chose not to. So I haven't heard the sermon. I haven't watched back the sermon. The only thing I know about the sermon is that it's about faith and that he's in Hebrews 11.
Correct.
Right? Okay. All right. We're already
Sometimes.
good.
Sometimes he's in Hebrews 11.
Oh, sometimes he does other things. So I figured what would be fun to do is a blind reaction, because I don't know what the sermon is.
Oh, we'll just talk about
Hopefully you do.
Yes. Now, I will say, normally I wait to take notes for the podcast until I watch it online, and then I have like lots of structure in my notes. Mm-hmm. This time I did it on my phone while he was preaching.
Yeah. So you just looked like you were texting the whole time?
Probably did. I mean, you know, I would be doing this, like, oh, that's pretty good. Okay, write that down, and then look up, and then, you know, but yeah, I should have brought my iPad, but I didn't.
Yeah. So what you're saying is you have not super structured notes?
My notes are not near as structured as they normally are.
So this is a bad week to do this.
Yeah, but that's okay. I think I got this.
We're going to figure it out together. Michael was there, though. You were there on Sunday, right?
There was church Sunday?
Yeah. Judah's usually like clueless about what the sermon even was about. Did you listen?
I had to go count, but I did listen.
Okay.
I came in on the sermon.
All right, so you can kind of hop in and help us where Jacob fails. You can step in.
I believe in Jacob.
I appreciate having your vote of confidence.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to you. You go ahead and recap the sermon, and I'm just going to blind react and just give my thoughts as we go.
I like this.
All right.
All right. So the sermon was entitled Mountain Moving Faith, and it was all about how if you just believe enough, you can move mountains.
Off to a good start. I like it.
Not literally, obviously, right? But mountain moving faith. And so he started off in Hebrews chapter 11, especially verses 1 through 3, verses 1 through 4. And so if you don't know about Hebrews 11, Hebrews 11 is the Hall of Faith, right? Chapter, so-called, where we have this sort of lineup, this roster of Old Testament figures that exercised faith.
Yeah.
And
basically a Hall of Fame for
faith. Correct. It's like they have been inducted by the writer to the Hebrews, whoever that might have been, because we don't know. It is one of the great mysteries. Do you have a theory on who wrote Hebrews?
Yeah, I've heard Luke. I don't think Luke. Some people maybe say Paul. I don't think Paul either. I don't know. I haven't done enough research into it.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be wrong. My favorite potential writer to the Hebrews is Apollos.
Oh, okay.
But I think it has to do with a lot of the structure of the language, and like it doesn't write much like Paul.
Yeah, Paul's very particular in how he writes, and it it doesn't come across as Paul,
right?
to me.
Or Luke, like we have
Yeah.
Luke and Acts that Luke wrote, and doesn't read the same. And
Yeah.
so, granted, it's a letter,
Yeah.
not a gospel or a historical account. But anyway, but no, Hebrews 11 is the chapter on faith, and so you want to read Hebrews 4 1 through 4.
Sure.
Awesome.
Hebrews 4, 1 through 4?
That's
you mean
it.
Hebrews 11, 1 through 4?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I was
See,
like,
my
what?
notes are not near as organized. I told you. Hebrews 11, 1 through 4.
It's like, well, I thought we were in chapter 11. Okay. Hebrews 11, 1 through 4. Here it is. Now, faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. For by this our ancestors were approved. By faith, we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. By faith, Abel offered to God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith, he was approved as a righteous man because God approved his gifts, and even though he is dead, he still speaks through his faith.
Awesome. So, the first thing that Lee talked about was how here in the very beginning of Hebrews 11, we get this definition of what faith is. It's the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And so one of the things that he brought up was really the difference. Like he talked about the eclipse. So I'm like, oh, everybody saw the eclipse, right? And so the question is not so much like what can be observed, but what can't be observed, right? Like scientists, for example, like they had it down to the minute when the eclipse was going to happen. They could tell you based on where you were. So then I didn't just pick one point and say, okay, at this point, the eclipse is going to last X amount of minutes and it's going to be in totality, whatever. Like you were able to see that like in the entire path of the eclipse, right? And you were able to look that up. And so like this is information that's readily available for us because somebody did the math, and however they do that, I have no idea. And they were able to actually tell you, hey, this is the time to go outside. This is when it'll hit totality. This is when you can take your glasses off, those sorts of things. But he also, at the same time, pointed out that scientists themselves, the one who are telling us the timing of these things, like there's nothing that they could do to like speed it up, make the eclipse come more frequently or last longer or those sorts of things, which is one of the, the big differences between us and like who God is. That God is the one that set those things in motion, right? And so,
So is it like the idea that these scientists, while they can do the calculations, they're placing faith that these things are going to act in the way that they're supposed to act?
Yeah,
is that the idea?
Yeah, in a way, because I mean, and it's based on rules and laws and things, but especially getting at the end of verse 1, the conviction of things not seen. So like when scientists go and approach any question, right? Like think about science fair. Like did y'all do science fairs? when y'all were growing up?
I didn't. I wasn't good at it.
Oh,
but,
really?
But I know what they are. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the whole thing's based on observation, right? So you come up with a question and then a hypothesis, like based on your question, which way do you think it's going to go? And then like, why? Why do you think that? And then you go and observe, right? You go and look and you collect data and you take notes and you figure out through this experiment, like, is your hypothesis correct or is it wrong, right? It's one or the other, but it's all based on observation. And here in Hebrews 11, I still have 4 written down here. Hebrews 11.
Hebrews 4 is about rest.
Yeah.
Were you tired at this time?
Maybe I was. I'm going to have to change it here so I don't accidentally say Hebrews 4 again. But faith doesn't deal with things that are seen or observable, which is, in a lot of ways, I think, things that are observable is really, like, in a big way, how we go about even thinking.
Yeah, so I've always thought about faith. So faith, like this says, faith by definition is placing your trust in something that like you can't see, right?
Yeah.
But the reason for faith can be placed in something that you can see, I would say, or at least experience at the very least. So like the scientists can place their faith in the eclipse happening at this moment because they've observed that this is how it operates, right? And so based off their observation on how things have operated in the past, they can say with relative certainty by faith that this is how it's going to operate in the future. And I think that's a lot how it operates with us too. I always like to compare it to chairs. We're sitting in these chairs right now. We exercised a tremendous amount of faith in these chairs when we sat down, right? Now, we're not controlling it, right? Like we're not, we're placing our hope in a future event that these chairs are going to be able to sustain us, but we're not doing that blindly. We're doing that because thousands of times throughout our life, we've experienced not only ourselves sitting in chairs and it holding up, but us watching other people sit in chairs and it hold them up. And so we're placing our faith on the chair, but we're doing it with reasonable understanding that we've observed chairs hold up people before. Have y'all ever had a chair not hold you up before? Like you sit in it and it like crumbles or you fall back. And then the next time you sit in chairs for a while, like you're very cautious on how you sit in that chair, right? Because your experience has shaken your faith a little bit in chairs. So I've always kind of viewed faith a little bit that way, that you can't see it and it's placed in something that's going to happen in the future, but it's supported by observation and experience.
Correct. Which have y'all ever seen those videos where like somebody will sit in one of those like plastic patio chairs and then somebody else comes and like kicks one of the legs out from under them and then they like fall over?
I like my daughter. We got her this Buc-ee's fold-up chair, like for kids. And whenever she first got, she's probably 2 at the time, and she didn't quite understand physics. And so when she sat in the chair, she like way leaned back and she just completely fell over. And it took her a while to trust that Buc-ee's chair again.
Buc-ee's has betrayed me.
Yes.
Well, I've had a chair fall before, and when it fell, I just wanted to look at the structure of the chair. Every chair I sat in after, I observed the chair to see, is this chair going to hold me?
Yeah.
And so it made me more observant before I sat in a chair in the future.
All of a sudden, you stop putting your blind faith in random chairs. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
And so I think that's an important distinction, especially, and I think the science thing is a good thing to bring up because typically atheists are like,
if I can't see it.
Yeah, if I can't see it, I won't believe it, or y'all are just blindly trusting in something you have no clue. Like we all blindly trust in things, or not blindly. We all place our faith in things that we can't see and that we can't prove. Science is full of theories that they can't tangibly prove. The only thing they can do is point to observation and evidence, like experiential evidence, to prove a theory of this is how it's going to operate in the future.
Correct. Yeah, which brings up a good question. So why do we need faith? Why is faith necessary for us?
Yeah, I think it's... is that an actual question or a rhetorical question?
I'll ask
Okay. I think for us, sometimes when we use the word faith, I think it gets lost on the typical average person because it's kind of been co-opted as faith is like you're giving away all of your capacity to think onto something that you can't prove. I think trust is a better word. Or not a better word, but a good synonym for faith. Trust is more like I understand God is this, X, Y, Z, and I'm going to trust Him because of that.
Yeah,
and that's really gets to the heart of what God wants. What God wants is trust. And so when you say faith, depending on how a person recognizes and understands faith, they may say like, "Oh, God just wants us to blindly follow Him." And I think at the heart of faith, what God wants is us to trust Him.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think a lot of the times faith gets, people tend to think of faith and just belief as synonyms. Like, yes, I believe that God is there. It's like, okay, that's good. That's step one.
Even the demons believe.
You're right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, belief, right, without trust is not faith. It's not biblical faith anyway, right? Those things go together, right? And so I think that's a good synonym. Trust.
Yes. And it's just important to know the full context of these words, because faith isn't a bad word. Belief isn't even a bad word. There's times in the Bible that uses the word belief synonymously with faith. And so it's just having the full context of, okay, what does belief mean?
Right.
What does faith mean? What does trust mean? They're all synonymous within each other.
Correct.
Yep.
Correct. Which, Pastor, he did pose that, why do we need faith, as a hypothetical, and said, well, how we prefer for God or for Jesus to just completely and totally reveal himself, to walk in and perform some miracles, and we would be able to see that and observe that with our eyes, and that would make things so much easier for us, wouldn't it?
In theory.
In theory, but the reality is, like, God has done this.
He's done that, yeah. And
Throughout history.
Throughout history, he's done that. And this was like, in the later part of Jesus' ministry, a big rub with him and the Pharisees, because the Pharisees are like, hey, if you're this, like, then do these things. And he's like, no more. And like, if you look at that passage in isolation, where so they asked him for a sign, and Jesus said, "An adulterous and wicked generation demand a sign." Basically saying, I'm not giving you a sign, right? I'm not giving you a miracle to validate these claims. And someone might look at that like, see, Jesus, he can't do it. He can't do it. Well, the fuller context, this is at the later point of his ministry. He's already done dozens, hundreds, if not thousands of miracles by this point in his ministry, in which the Pharisees, the ones questioning him about this, have already seen that.
And responded.
in disbelief.
Yeah.
And so at this point, it's like, if you hadn't believed the miracles yet, you're not going to believe them now, right? It's like, you've already been given enough sufficient evidence to validate I am who I am, and you've rejected it.
Yep.
So I'm not going to give you any more, right? And you see that a lot in conversations with atheists, where in the conversation they're like, hey, if God came down and gave you sufficient proof right now, would you believe in him, worship him, follow him? And they're like, no. It's like, well, then why do you want evidence?
Right.
Like it's a non-starter, because you're starting from the point of, even if I have evidence, I'm not going to believe. Well, then what's the point?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, even those that would say the opposite, right? If God spoke to me and it was clear, and I had this irrefutable evidence that God exists, right, in the atheist's case, then yeah, I would believe. Yeah, of course I would believe, because I could observe that. And it's like, well, the track record of history shows that it's false. Look at the Israelites at Mount Sinai, right? Here we have God's presence descending on the mountain to meet with Moses. There's lightning, there's smoke, there's fire. Like, it's this huge thing, right? And that doesn't just happen, right?
Right.
Here we go. We have God appearing to them through a pillar of fire by night, pillar of cloud during the day. The
earth opening up and swallowing
Yeah.
those who go against him.
Yeah, and yet they still persist.
Yeah.
in their grumbling. I mean, think of all the miracles that just the Exodus generation saw, with the 10 plagues, right? The Passover, with being led out of Egypt quickly, right? The Red Sea has been parted, right? They see a manifestation of God's presence descending on Mount Sinai, like all of these things, and they still, like, they built a golden calf, right? They continually rebelled against God the entire way, which I think really points to, okay, despite any and all observations that we all might make, right, there's still this sin issue.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to the heart of it. Like, faith, for the most part, isn't an evidence issue. I think evidence is a part of it.
And it's a good thing.
And it's a good thing. And we can talk more about the evidence that kind of leads us to it. But for the most part, it's not an evidence issue. It's a small part. This is what Dave Ramsey says all the time with financial issues, the topic of finances, is that it's 20% head knowledge and 80% behavior, right? It's like, we all know how to do basic math. Like, we all know that X plus this does not equal what we make in our paycheck. And so we're now operating at a deficit. We don't need a class to understand how to do basic math.
I don't know, man. I think I needed a class how to do basic math.
Well, I mean, we've all have that class. Yeah.
I'm not a math person.
Yes. For the most part, we can all understand
Yeah.
what's a good financial decision and what's a bad financial decision.
Right.
What's harder, the 80% of it, is our behavior and like telling ourselves no
Right.
whenever we want this over here.
Yeah, $1,000 minus $1,500 is negative $500.
Yeah. We don't need a PhD to understand that. And kind of similar with faith, evidence is a part of it. And I think evidence is a good thing. And you should know the evidence for your faith. I think there should be a foundation of evidence on there. But the vast majority of faith isn't about the evidence. It's about, do you trust God?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's the behavior side.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't. I know what you mean. I'd be hesitant to use the word behavior because it might imply the
Like
kind
an
of works,
action.
like a work salvation thing. I do know what you mean though.
I was paralleling
Yes.
Dave Ramsey.
I just want to make sure no one out there is confused by that. Faith, by definition, is not works, and I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yes. So, why do we need to have faith? Because it's a heart issue, first and foremost, before anything else. Like reasonable faith is a good thing, right? We have a reasonable faith.
I think reasonable's the key word there.
Yeah.
Because when you get into I need evidence, what people really want is like a literal like sign from heaven coming down. And I think a better way to approach it is the reasonable faith. Like in any court case, they're not trying to, I guess to the best of their ability, they're trying to prove XYZ happened. But the verdict is based on beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And so it's like there might be cases where you can't literally tangibly prove with video evidence that something did, but there's enough evidence to support this happened beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah,
right?
correct. You can't jump into time machine and go back and see, did this person actually murder that person over there, right? We rely on evidence.
Yeah.
And we rely on evidence for all kinds of things.
Yeah, and it's just important to note, evidence doesn't always mean a video recorder.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And even now, can you really trust those?
Yeah, that's true. Dude, that's very valid.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
How, we have a picture. We have a video recording of this guy robbing that convenience store. It kind of makes you wonder.
It really is going to be an interesting world moving forward. Because it used to be, if things were written out, like so-and-so said this, like you have to have a degree of skepticism about whether or not they said that. But you would be able to rely on video for the most part. And now you're like, you can't even rely on video anymore because AI's getting pretty good.
Yep.
At a glance, you can be tricked.
Yeah. And so the link really between Christ having been here and us, and the transition from him again being physically here on the earth in his earthly ministry, his crucifixion, his resurrection, and like the disciples, for example, like they actually witnessed like the risen Christ, for example, and then Pastor moves into doubting Thomas, and how he demanded evidence. He wanted physical proof that Jesus had, in fact, been crucified. It was the same Jesus, and he was raised from the dead, right? Unless I put my hands where the nails were and where the spear pierced his side, I will by no means believe, is what he says. And then Jesus appears to him later, and a week later or something like that, and says, "Okay, go ahead." Yeah. and he Thomas, confesses and professes to believe at that point, and Jesus says, "You have you believed because you've seen?" And then he says, "I tell you, blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe." So I think that's a nice link for us, right? And the way that our faith is to work, right? Like we rely on the evidence of the biblical witness.
Yeah, and it's not like Jesus sidestepping proof. It's just the reality of the situation.
Right. He's ascended.
He's ascended. He's back in heaven, and there's not cameras back then, and so it's like just. I think the statement would make complete sense back then, and to us, we're like, Gen Zers, Gen Alpha people are like, well, why didn't they record this? Like, there was a world before cameras,
right?
Anyways, but we rely on witness testimony, both biblical documents and also extra biblical. Is that how they say it?
Yeah.
Extra biblical documents that look to Jesus was in fact a historical person, because there's kind of multiple parts to it on the evidence side, and we're getting a little bit more into apologetics now. There's the claim of, okay, was Jesus real? Throw the God part out the window just for a second. Was he real? Can we confirm that he was in fact a historical person? We have biblical evidence and extra biblical evidence that point to that. And then we get into the question of, okay, was he God? Did the resurrection happen? So on and so forth. Again, more apologetics.
Correct. But from our perspective, right, and things have changed pretty quick as far as technology goes. And I think it has changed. We've been kind of like hitting around this. It's changed our assumption about evidence and valid evidence, and how can we know beyond a shadow of a doubt? Whatever it might be. And so much of it, is videos, pictures, media, right? Things that we normally consume. And so I do think it's important not to take that and then apply the same standards of evidence that we would think of today back 2,000 years ago, first century Judea, or anywhere for that matter. You're right, and it's good. I think it's good to be conscious of that. To know that we're talking about different standards of reasonable evidence, or evidence that leads to reasonable faith. Okay.
All right, we better get moving.
Yeah, let's keep going.
We're on the time crunch here.
That's right. So, in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11, none of the people that are listed there exercised perfect faith all the time, right? Well, many of them struggled with their faith. Like Abraham is held up in Scripture as one of the predominant cases of faith, right? Like by faith, he was even ready to sacrifice Isaac because he trusted in God's promises to the extent that he believed that God would raise Isaac back from the dead. And that's some faith right there. That's intense, and I love it. I love that. But it doesn't mean that he didn't struggle, right?
He had lots of failures.
He did. And so Pastor listed off some of the kind of rapid fire, some of the failures of faith of those who are in the Hall of Faith. It's not perfect. And so then
that's not the point of faith. The point of faith isn't to be perfect.
Right.
That would be works.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a connection between faith and works, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And so if we find ourselves struggling in our own faith, God wants us to renew our faith in Him, was one of the sort of subpoints that we had. And then the question is, okay, how can we do that? And the first is to recognize common misunderstandings about faith. So the first one that he mentioned is that faith is like a virus, or faith is a virus, that you just kind of catch it.
These are the misconceptions. Okay.
Yes, it infects you, and then after a while it goes away.
Okay.
Thoughts?
Cool. Thoughts? I agree that's not a good way to think about it.
I just don't have it. I don't have the flu right now. I just don't have it. Maybe it'll hit me later, but I just don't have it right now.
Yeah. I don't even know how to address that. I agree that that's not a good way to think about it, because that kind of faith is more of a. So without getting into the works thing, faith and works are not the same thing. Faith leads into works, but faith is not works. Faith is more of for a better way to put it, a mindset. But mindset does lead into behavior. But a mindset is an action. So it's an action, but it's not an action. Does that make sense? So it's I think if you're thinking along the mindset of, I either have it or don't have it, then that kind of gets into a fatalist mentality of,
nothing I can do.
Nothing I can do. No, it is something that you can do. If we were to compare it to marriage, it's well, I just don't love my spouse anymore. So it's
love that one.
Yeah. So it's okay, I should just bounce. All right. It's in the same way. It's treating love as a virus, like I had before. I don't have it now. It's kind of, it's starting to conflate faith or love and emotion together with each other. It's like I feel it, therefore I do it. And it's like you shouldn't treat love that way. Whether or not you feel like loving your spouse bears no weight on whether you should love your spouse. And whether or not you feel like having faith shouldn't have any weight in actually having faith in God.
Right. Which it flows into the next one that he mentioned. Faith is not like a virus. Faith also isn't passed down in genetics. Nobody's born with the faith gene.
Yeah.
Like Pastor, he said about himself, he's like, that guy's he's a pastor. He must have been born with faith. And he says, he told us, he's like, no, not so much.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I hope everyone understands. Sometimes people put way too much pressure on pastors to be perfect, but then sometimes people have a false assumption that pastors it just comes natural to them, right? And I would imagine all three of us. Can you not hear?
No, your mic is making noise, like a static or a pop.
Just my mic?
Oh,
Or his too?
yours?
Hello?
Oh, it went away.
Oh.
So is mine working now?
Yeah, just don't move. Stay like that
Don't
the
move.
whole time.
Okay, phew. Okay. Michael, our technical advisor, is keeping
All
us
clear.
on track. So, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. I think people think that it just kind of comes naturally to us. It's like all three of us can probably agree. We struggle with sin, right? We struggle with living out the Christian life. And so I think it's easy to assume, okay, just because they're a pastor, they're like closer to God, and therefore it just comes easier to them. Like, no, like faith is a struggle. It's like Jacob, which I think is Jacob mentioned in the Hall of Faith.
I think so.
Yeah, Jacob literally wrestles with God, or wrestle with an angel. It kind of depends on how you interpret that.
Right.
But his name means wrestle with God, right? And so faith is a struggle aspect, and yeah, if you go on that you're born with it thing, again, it kind of pulls it back to this kind of fatalistic mindset of, it's not easy for me, therefore it's like I just don't have it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so why try?
Yeah.
Or, why move in that direction if I don't have it? The third one is, it's right in line. He had he started his third sort of sub point on this. He told everybody how much he hates broccoli because broccoli tastes terrible.
I did see a bit of this. So when I was like putting the sermon together to post online, I clicked on that, and he just was going to town on broccoli.
I know.
I like broccoli.
It's like, leave broccoli alone.
Yeah. Do you like broccoli, Michael?
I love broccoli.
Yeah. So Lee's the only one. Man, a good broccoli cheddar soup.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Yeah.
Or broccoli rice casserole. Oh, yeah. That's
I
good.
think broccoli, like a sauteed broccoli, like mixed in with stuff, is really good.
Yep.
What if we all made our favorite broccoli dish and brought it to him? We could convert him to be a broccoli lover.
Could. So for the longest time, when we would make pastas and stuff, it was just like pasta, sauce, and meat, whatever. And I saw this thing online. It's like, hey, like incorporate veggies, and that it kind of beefs it up a little bit and adds some more nutritional value. And so I started doing that. Like, about to saute up some broccoli, mix it in, and like adds like a nice extra bit. I'm a broccoli fan. I like broccoli.
It is good.
Yeah.
And his point with that was like, no amount of persuasion or broccoli dishes will possibly change my mind about broccoli.
We'll change his mind.
Dude, how do you not like broccoli cheddar soup? It's like this like creamy.
It's good.
It's got a lot of dairy, so it's like, I don't know if it's good for you, but
Probably not.
but it's good.
That's why it's good.
Yeah.
It's because it's bad for you.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. And Pastor he's just not that way. He just doesn't like broccoli. Doesn't matter. But that's also not what faith is.
That's a
like.
good example of even if we presented sufficient evidence to him, he just wouldn't believe.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. Wonder if he's listening.
I hope he listens to this part. Yeah. Okay. So from there, Pastor moves from what faith is not to what faith is. And he says that faith is both a gift and a choice. So he quotes Ephesians 2, verse 8 and following, that by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not of yourself; it is a gift of God, lest anyone should boast. I think is that tacked on at the end.
Saved by grace through faith. This is a gift of God, not that anyone. Yeah.
Yeah. And so let me try again. Since faith is a gift, then this is something that we can ask God for. Mm-hmm. And it brought to mind for me the man who came to Jesus. He was asking for his son to be healed. And
I believe, help my unbelief.
Yeah, exactly. And so, there's going to be deficiencies right in our faith, and we can ask God to help us with those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then at the same time, faith is not only a gift, but it's also a choice. It's something that we positively choose to do. It's something that we it's not like it's a 100% passive thing, like a virus that you have to catch, right? Yeah. But it's also, in a lot of ways, it leads us to, I don't know, I'm getting ahead a little bit. It's also an action, right? It's something that we, like, it's not just passive, it is, but at the same time, it's not. Right? Yeah. It's something that we actively have to be pursuing and be engaged in, right, to later exercise faith.
Yeah, and this gets into, because faith is like a sociological thing. Well, it's sociological and not sociological, depending on where in the timeline you are in terms of faith. And I think depending on where you would line up on the soteriology debate, whether you're full determinist on one extreme, and then like full Pelagian on the other extreme. Most people fall in between, where it's like it's both and, right? There's the part of like salvation is completely on God's end, yet at the same time there's responsibility on our end. Now the definitions within that might get a little murky depending on where on that path you land, but most people would and should agree that man does have responsibility to trust God, yet God has full ownership on salvation, right? And so it's kind of where that the seeming paradox kind of hangs in tandem with each other.
Yeah, and it hurts our brains a lot of time.
Which it should.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Understanding the things of God, especially even things that He's revealed to us, can hurt your brain. Yeah. It's like, God's sovereignty plus human responsibility at the same time. How do those mesh? And or it could be like the Trinity. Like, let's talk about the Trinity, right? Like, if that doesn't, that's how God has revealed Himself. But if it doesn't give you a bit of a headache, then you're probably not thinking about it right.
Yeah, and that it totally makes sense that His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are higher than ours, and so it totally makes sense that our 5-inch brain probably can't fully grasp the infinite God who's existed before time even existed.
Right. Just pause on that. Wrap your mind around that. If you can figure that out.
It would totally make sense that we can't fully understand every little aspect.
Yeah.
But
granted, He has revealed Himself to us, and
we can understand what we need to know.
Correct. Yes. Correct. Yes. What can be known about God, He's told us.
Yes.
Yes. Which is why the second point was to choose faith. So 1 Peter 2, verses 2 and 3, we read, it says, "Like newborn infants, long for the pure spiritual milk, that by it you may grow up into salvation, if indeed you have tasted that the Lord is good." And so faith isn't something that's optional. Lee taught us on Sunday that faith is actually a command to believe, to trust, to follow. It's not something that's optional. It's something that we are called to do.
It's it's one of the foundations of the faith, of Christianity.
I know what you meant. Yep, exactly. And so, and this is where, again, asking God for faith, for help in areas where we have a lack of faith is something that we can do, that we're actually encouraged to do. If we recognize that we have a weak spot here or there, or our faith is struggling with this or that, like take it to God and ask Him for help.
Yep.
And He's faithful to help us in those things, right? Ask, you will receive, right?
Yep.
The things that He has for us, the good things that He has for us. So prayer is one way to do this. Another is to be in the Word. It's like, how are we going to believe and exercise faith if we don't know what our faith is or what it has to do?
And that's a huge thing. A lot of people are like, yeah, trust God, have faith in God, but it's their lack of knowledge about God turns that into like a colloquialism more than anything. Because like, again, this is where I think like in our context, trust works a little bit better. I trust God. Okay, well, let's get more specific. I trust God in my finances. Okay, let's get more specific. I trust God in how He calls me to operate my finances. Okay, you don't know what God says about finances. It's like, how do you trust to operate your finances in how God calls us to if you don't know how God calls us to? And so it's like you literally cannot trust God in an area that you don't have knowledge about how God calls you to do. And so that's where studying the Word really helps.
Yeah.
Trust all of a sudden works much better whenever you have the game plan that God laid out for you to walk.
Right.
Yeah,
you know how to go about trusting even, or
And that's where that faith and works are not the same thing, but faith should lead to works.
Right.
Because if you go by the pure definition of faith is in that you're trusting in, okay, let's go back to finances. You're trusting your finances with God, meaning you're trusting how He told us to operate them. And so that should lead to, in theory, you trust God. It should lead to, in theory, you doing the works or the behaviors that God has called you to do in that trust. So trust isn't the behavior, but trust is what leads to the behavior.
Correct. Which was his last point, was demonstrate your faith.
Yeah.
Faith isn't something that's just a hypothetical, which we've kind of hit on that a little bit.
I didn't even need to hear the sermon.
Yeah. We got it.
Yeah.
We got it. Faith isn't any good if we never use it, if we never exercise it. Faith without works is dead. Yeah. It's like, do you even have faith?
Yeah.
Like, show us your works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's basically the sermon.
Well, cool.
Faith that'll move mountains.
I kind of like to blind react into this. I may never listen to a sermon again.
We'll just get it in the podcast.
Yeah. It's like, Chris, did you listen? No. But not because I didn't want to. It's because I want to give y'all a true reaction to it. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
I like it. Faith. Michael, you got any thoughts on faith?
Nope, not at all.
That was way too broad a question.
Yeah.
Michael told me before this, he's like, you better not call on me to answer any questions. Here I am calling on him. Anyways, all right, let's move along. We're going to go into the bad doctrine of the week.
It's the bad doctrine of the week.
All right, bad doctrine of the week. This one I didn't realize, again, because I didn't know what the sermon was. Oh, wait, you can keep that off for a second.
Spoiled it.
Yeah, he spoiled it. It kind of worked out. I didn't know, again, what we were going to talk about. But we talked a lot about atheists and how faith among Christians and faith among atheists, how that all interacts. Well, the bad doctrine of the week has to do with atheists. This is apparently an old, what's the word? Story about atheism. All right, Michael, you can go ahead and throw that up. I'll read it for us if I can find it on mine. All right, so title is, Why Did God Create Atheists? There's a famous story told in Chassidic literature that addresses this very question. The master teaches the student that God created everything in the world to be appreciated, since everything is here to teach us a lesson. All right, that's the premise. Everything is here to teach us a lesson. Okay. One clever student asked, what lesson can we learn from atheists? Why did God create them? There's a lot of assumptions happening here, but let's just keep going. The master responds, God created atheists to teach us the most important lesson of them all, the lesson of true compassion. You see, when an atheist performs an act of charity, visits someone who is sick, helps someone in need, and cares for the world, he is not doing so because of some religious teaching. He does not believe that God commanded him to perform this act. In fact, he does not believe in God at all. So his acts are based on an inner sense of morality. And look at the kindness he can bestow on others simply because he feels it to be right. This means, the master continued, that when someone reaches out to you for help, you should never say, I pray that God will help you. Instead, for the moment, you should become an atheist, imagine there is no God who can help, and say, I will help you. All right. There's lots of stuff in here, but what's your initial thought?
Well, the one that stuck out to me is true compassion. Like, atheists are the ones that have true compassion because out of this deep sense of responsibility for their fellow man, anytime an atheist helps anyone, that's true compassion, right? They're not doing it out of compulsion or responding to any sort of command or anything like that. Which is a funny argument. It's interesting. I would argue that that's a reflection of God's common grace to mankind. Like the fact that we have a conscience, the fact that...
Well, that's one thing, kind of the biggest issue I have with this. So he's doing it because of true compassion, not because of a compulsion and a command. And it says, quote, in fact, he does not believe in God at all, so his acts are based on an inner sense of morality.
Yeah.
That's a huge presumption right there.
It's a big claim.
Yeah, it's a big claim because, so if you're going down the atheist rabbit hole, and maybe there's different varying degrees of this, the question you have to answer not is compassion a thing, but you have to answer the question of where does morality come from, right? Because so as Christians, we say morality comes from God, and God gives us an inner sense of morality. That very claim right there. Atheists, though, where does the inner sense of morality come from, right? And then how do you land on whose inner sense of morality is correct?
Well, whoever you're talking to,
right?
Chris. Right.
Well, because for the longest time, okay, so like now, because of culture and society, we have kind of ingrained in us this inner sense of morality of, you see an old woman crossing the road, you should go help them, or if you go see someone push an old woman down, steal her groceries, we all know, whether Christian or not, that's probably not the right thing to do. It's not always been the case, though.
Correct.
Right? Throughout history, if you go back far enough, people, if you were in power, you ascended to power. If you weren't in power, well, it sucks to suck, right? And so the question you have to answer is, where did you get that morality from?
Right.
And why is your morality correct versus another person's morality?
And I like, we can think of a lot of practical examples of this. So, like today, like an atheist that would make this claim has had the benefit of, has had the benefit of living in Western civilization. If they're here, let's say in the United States or Europe or wherever.
That's assuming the story is probably Western civilization.
Right.
Yeah.
Fair assumption.
Yeah.
So they've had the benefit of, the better part of 2,000 years of Christianity
becoming embedded in the culture.
Correct. As part of the culture. And was it Dawkins that recently said that famous atheist and writes books about atheism and how awesome it is? He came out, week before, and said, no, cultural Christianity is actually a really, really good thing. Like, we need cultural Christianity. And so, for us here, if we don't know much about the history of what morality used to look like really before, the coming of Christ and, the spreading of the gospel and the Christianization of the West, then it would be really easy to just make an assumption that the morality that everybody generally has, right? Those general things that we view as right and wrong, is just natural. And it's nothing could be further from the truth.
Right. And that's what makes the Bible so remarkable. So you can't do this, but let's just strip God of the Bible and just look at the teachings of the Bible. They were remarkably revolutionary for the time. The fact that, in the beginning, God created Adam and Eve, and both were made in the image of God. That's a remarkable teaching. We look at that and we're like, yeah, totally makes sense.
Yep.
Back then, that was women were not considered equal to
Right.
men in the slightest, right? Like all these provisions for caring for the widows, caring for the orphans, caring for the helpless, remarkable teachings
Oh, yeah.
for that time. We just take it for granted as like, oh, it's just everyone knows that.
Yeah.
No, the vast majority of history did not know that.
Right, correct. Like in the ancient world, in Greece and Rome, right? Like babies that were born with deformities, for example, a lot of times, depending on exactly when and where you find yourself, might just be left out in the elements to die, for example. And that was
Wait, are you talking about today?
no,
Or
no, in the ancient world.
oh,
okay.
Because like that's an argument for abortion,
Right.
In the genetic testing, that if you do the genetic testing prior to the birth and figure out, oh, they're going to have deformities, then
Just have an abortion.
just
and
have
get
an
it over
abortion.
with.
You know, let's take compassion on this child
Right.
and kill it.
Bull.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm just pointing out how
Yeah.
we're going full circle in our thought process.
Yeah, 100%. And there's still a thread and a string of that. But one of the things that early Christians would do is they would go and pick those babies up that had been left out and would adopt them. And so that was, socially, culturally, like this is a huge shift. And like it's again being made in God's image, that we have this inherent value, not because of us, but because of who God is. And the early Christians would go and do that. Just one example. Let's take another example. How about the Aztecs, right? When the Spanish came over and early 1500s or so, and what did they find? Right, here comes Cortez off of his ship. He goes to Tenochtitlan, which is Mexico City, and what do they do there? Well, they go and round up a bunch of their enemies and like human sacrifice hundreds of thousands of people. And this was a good thing for them. They have a big party and a celebration, like, woo, the sun's going to keep shining on us today, kind of a thing. Like, if you want to take a case study, right, when that's relatively recent, when we're talking 500 years or so, it's like that was going on in North America or Central America, It's like, no, Christian ethics, morals, morality, a Christian conscience is not something that comes naturally.
Right. Well, and if you even go even more recently, let's go today. Palestine, Israel stuff.
Yeah.
No matter where you fall on it, there's civilian casualties are taking place in there, and you have one person that says this is awful, egregious, this shouldn't happen. But then you have other people saying, no, that needs to happen, right? They both are working off their own inner sense of morality to execute their actions. Which one's right? Right? So if you have a central point, so like Christianity has God to lean back on. It's like, I'm not saying this because I think it's right. I'm saying this because God, His authority, His word says this is right. So we have a first cause.
It's an objective morality.
Yeah. Where once you remove that, morality becomes subjective. And no one can prove their own morality is correct because you're just appealing to your own authority.
Yep.
Right? Now, you have guys like Sam something, famous atheist. Gosh, it's going to drive me insane that I can't remember his name. Famous atheist now. He appeals to like medical science to produce our objective morality. But even that gets weird because he would land on we can use science to find flourishing of life, and flourishing of life should produce our morality. So he's kind of like, instead of appealing to God as our objective morality, he's appealing to science as our objective morality. But then,
like it can be observed.
Well, so flourishing of life, that I think that's the terminology they uses. That even gets weird because it's like, okay, are we talking about flourishing of life mentally, flourishing of life physically, flourishing of life emotionally? Like it's
relationally. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to slice that.
Even that becomes very subjective in that. And so, but at least I applaud him because he's trying to appeal to some sort of cause to this outside of himself. And so anyways, it's a lot of presumptions to say they're acting out true compassion because they're doing it off of their own actual morality rather than a compulsion, which is a whole separate thing that we won't get into. But lots of things to talk about in this. I just found that I kind of found that a little funny.
Yep. And the funny part is, we're talking about faith leading to works, and a saving faith does lead to works, right? Being compassionate and not just out of compulsion, right? But it's like the passage on giving, right? God loves a cheerful giver, right? Not out of compulsion. It's and that's what we have, right? But it's rooted and based on our faith and our trust and our obedience to God, right?
Yeah.
Well, the atheist, let's accept the premise and say that the atheist truly is compassionate, more compassionate than a Christian is because of the lack of command or whatever. Well, I would argue they're still under God's command, first off. But then, second, it's like, can that compassion save them? And the answer is no, right? Because sin hadn't been dealt with in their lives. That doesn't mean that you can't be a relatively good person, right? But those good works amount to absolutely nothing in the eyes of God. So it's like, checkmate.
Yep. All right, lots more we can say about that, but we'll
I wanted to hit the next one too. The next paragraph. No, I'm.
Oh, I was about to say. I'm like, okay. You'll have to deal with Michael there.
Yeah, time limit.
Yeah, lots more to say about that. But we'll just close it there.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, you got any final thoughts?
This was amazing. You've changed my thought of the podcast. I'm happy to be here every week.
Okay. All right. Well,
kind of like how Pastor's mind is going to be changed with broccoli.
Absolutely.
Yes.
broccoli. I love broccoli. Broccoli's even good. So I like cooked broccoli better than raw broccoli, but even raw broccoli with like a ranch dip.
Oh yeah.
Oh, it's pretty good. No, you're not a raw broccoli guy. Yeah.
You lost me there.
Yeah.
You got to have ranch with it though.
Yeah. By itself, it's like
Yeah.
But like a steamed broccoli is even pretty good. Sauteed broccoli is pretty good. Baked broccoli, like where it gets like kind of crispy.
I'm starting to feel like we're in that scene from Forrest Gump.
Yeah, with the shrimp.
Gumbo, shrimp saute.
They're just like, I like every form of broccoli. And so I'm a little bit offended that broccoli got raked over the coals.
But Pastor did say in the sermon that if you disagree with my stance on broccoli, go to seminary, get a degree, become a preacher, and you can say whatever you want to say about broccoli. So he's opened the door for you, is what it sounds like.
Next time I preach, it's going to be completely geared around broccoli.
Can you do illustrations with broccoli?
The title of the sermon.
Dresses broccoli.
Graphic. Maybe.
Yes.
I'm going to think about it. How can I craft a sermon around broccoli? And the first thing I'm going to say, Pastor Lee said this.
Pastor Lee said I could.
He said, go to seminary, become a pastor, and you can talk about it as much as you want. I'm holding them to those words.
It's going to be awesome.
If you like broccoli, you let us know down in the comments. All right. We're glad y'all joined us. We'll see y'all next week.